Forget the Wild West Hollywood sold you. Most cowboys were not walking around with polished Colt revolvers spinning on their fingers while firing endless bullets into the air. In the real frontier, a single box of ammunition could cost a laborer part of a week's wages, and many gunfighters carried worn-out second-hand weapons that were just as dangerous to the owner as the man standing across from him. A frontier gun shop was not a glamorous armory filled with legendary firearms waiting for heroes. It was a cramped, oily business where rusted revolvers sat beside expensive Winchesters most people could never afford, where black powder stained the counters black, and where $10 often decided whether a man walked out protected or desperate. Today, we're uncovering what $10 really bought inside a Wild West gun shop during the 1860s and 1880s, and why the reality looked nothing like the movies. By the end of this story, the myth of the endlessly armed cowboy starts falling apart. The smell usually hit first. Gun shops in frontier towns carried the scent of machine oil, tobacco smoke, leather, and black powder that clung to the walls year-round. Wooden floors creaked under muddy boots while iron revolvers rested behind scratch glass cabinets lit by weak oil lamps. Dust drifted through open doorways every time somebody entered from the street outside, bringing in the smell of horse sweat and manure from the road. Some shops doubled as hardware stores or general stores because firearms alone did not always pay the bills. Rifles leaned beside farming tools. Powder kegs sat near lanterns in ways that would horrify modern fire inspectors. A single spark could turn the entire building into an explosion. And standing at those counters were not legendary gunslingers. Most were exhausted workers counting coins carefully before asking the price of ammunition. That is the part Hollywood usually ignores. $10 in the 1870s was serious money. A cowhand might earn $30 a month after weeks sleeping outside, driving cattle through storms, heat, and freezing nights. Army privates earned even less. For many frontier workers, $10 represented a quarter or even half of their monthly income. Spending that kind of money on a firearm was not casual. It was closer to a major survival purchase. And survival was exactly what many people had in mind. A brand new Colt single-action army revolver, the famous Peacemaker later romanticized in countless westerns, often sold for around $17 to $20 depending on location and availability. In isolated mining towns, prices sometimes climbed even higher because transportation costs pushed everything upward. That meant many men standing in those shops could not actually afford the iconic revolvers Hollywood associates with the Wild West. Instead, they bought used guns. A worn percussion revolver with scratches across the grip might sit in a display case for $8 or $10 beside newer cartridge pistols costing twice as much. Some had damaged timing mechanisms that caused cylinders to misalign slightly when fired. Others carried rust inside the barrel from years of neglect and black powder residue. A buyer turning one over in his hands had to ask himself a dangerous question. Was the gun more likely to stop an attacker or explode in his own grip first? Frontier gun ownership was often less about style than compromise. The farther west somebody traveled, the stranger the market became. Mail-order catalogs from companies in the East sometimes sold firearms cheaper than local stores, which created tension between frontier merchants and outside suppliers. A revolver ordered through a catalog could save several dollars compared to buying the same weapon in a remote cattle town. But there was a problem. Waiting weeks for delivery meant surviving unarmed until the shipment arrived. A miner heading into dangerous territory rarely had that kind of time, so frontier gun shops charged premiums because they could. Ammunition, especially metallic cartridges, became notoriously expensive in isolated regions. A handful of cartridges scattered across a counter represented real money to a working man. That changed how people used firearms. Hollywood loves massive shootouts where revolvers fire endlessly without reloading. Reality looked very different. Frontier travelers often counted their ammunition shot by shot because every missed bullet cost money. Some reused brass cartridges whenever possible. Others melted lead and cast their own bullets beside campfires to avoid paying store prices. Even experienced gunfighters sometimes avoided unnecessary shooting simply because ammunition was too valuable to waste. The economics of violence mattered in the real West, and sometimes those economics became deadly. Inside many shops, gunsmiths worked constantly to repair damaged firearms that owners could not afford to replace. Black powder fouled weapons quickly, leaving thick residue inside barrels and cylinders after repeated firing. Springs snapped. Firing pins wore down. Wooden grips cracked in dry desert climates. A frontier revolver demanded maintenance almost as much as a horse. One repair bill could easily consume several dollars, meaning $10 often disappeared into upkeep instead of buying anything new at all. A ranch hand entering a gun shop hoping to purchase protection might leave with nothing more than repaired parts and a warning to clean his weapon properly next time. The West ran on maintenance, not glamour, and the gun shops themselves could be dangerous places. Loose black powder sat in barrels or paper cartridges dangerously close to lantern flames and cigar smoke. Some stores stored blasting powder for miners alongside revolvers and ammunition. Accidental explosions happened often enough that newspapers occasionally reported entire buildings destroyed in seconds. In 1883, a fire in a hardware and gun store in Dodge City ignited ammunition inside the building, sending cartridges exploding into the street while townspeople dove for cover. Witnesses described bullets firing randomly through smoke as the shop burned itself apart from the inside. Even buying a gun carried risks beyond violence. But perhaps the biggest myth involves who actually carried weapons in town. Movies portray frontier streets filled with armed men openly wearing revolvers everywhere they went. In reality, many Western towns enforced surprisingly strict gun regulations. Dodge City, Tombstone, and Deadwood all passed ordinances limiting or banning the carrying of firearms inside town limits at various times. Signs near entrances warned visitors to surrender weapons at sheriff offices, hotels, or saloons. And many people obeyed. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral partly erupted because the Clanton group refused to disarm after entering Tombstone. The confrontation itself centered around enforcing local gun ordinances. The lawless West often tried very hard not to become lawless at all. Still, danger never disappeared completely. A miner with $10 in his pocket entering a gun shop faced difficult choices. A cheap used revolver might save his life during a robbery but fail when needed most. A quality Winchester repeating rifle offered far better protection, but prices often climbed above $40, completely unreachable for many workers. Some buyers settled for single-shot weapons because that was all they could afford. Others carried old Civil War surplus guns long after newer technology appeared because replacing them simply cost too much. The romantic image of every cowboy carrying expensive matching revolvers belonged mostly to wealthy ranchers, famous lawmen, gamblers, or men already successful enough to afford appearances. Most ordinary frontier workers looked far less impressive, and sometimes desperation created its own market. Cheap imported revolvers flooded parts of the West during the late 19th century. Some came from Belgium and other European manufacturers producing low-cost firearms quickly and cheaply. They sold because poorer buyers needed something, anything they could afford. But many frontier newspapers mocked these weapons openly. Some gained reputations for misfires, broken cylinders, or barrels splitting during use. A badly made revolver carried on the frontier could become a liability the moment violence started. Yet people bought them anyway because survival rarely waited for ideal circumstances. That reality changes how the Old West starts to look. The frontier was not filled with fearless gunfighters casually throwing bullets around town squares. It was filled with workers, drifters, miners, ranch hands, immigrants, and exhausted travelers trying to navigate dangerous places with limited money and uncertain protection. Inside those gun shops, every purchase involved compromise. A revolver meant sacrificing weeks of wages. Ammunition meant fewer supplies somewhere else. Repairs competed against food, rent, whiskey, or winter clothing. Even wealthy buyers worried about shortages because supply lines across the frontier remained fragile and unpredictable. Violence itself became tied to economics. And the farther somebody stood from wealth, the more dangerous the compromise became. Hollywood turned frontier firearms into symbols of freedom and power. Reality was much narrower, harsher, and more fragile than that. For many people living in the American West, a gun was not a stylish accessory carried by a legend. It was an expensive piece of machinery bought by men who could barely afford to fire it.